liked how what you instructed was things that people should do
Yeah.
by themselves essentially.
Yeah.
You do some stuff with people,
Right.
but by themselves,
Right.
right?
Right.
So how do you navigate the internet without um, giving in to strange doctrine, right?
Mm-hmm.
We say eat the meat to spit out the bones,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
How
Mm-hmm.
can how can you do that? Because I never explain to people. I'll just because that's
Great
hard, bro. We
question.
grew up in it
Great
our
question.
whole lives, so
Yeah.
it's so easy to eat the meat. But you see different all forms of mysticism. You see people taking a little bit of truth and going crazy. You
Yeah.
see Mormonism. You
Yeah.
see the Hebrew Israelites.
Yeah.
They take a little bit of truth
Yeah.
and then they just go wow.
Yeah.
What is your process for eating the meat, spitting out the bones?
Yeah. You know me. How does it line up with that word?
Yeah.
And ultimately, like I tell people, great example that you said when it comes to either Mormons, Hebrew Israelites, Catholics, I'm just gonna call it out like it is, any of those groups, you can sit here and tell me one thing and I will know exactly, like I may not know the exact address to which you pulled it from, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And this is why I tell people you have to know the word in its context. Because there are a lot of people, like you said, sprinkle that truth. That's because they're a con to the text. So what they do is they take this thing out of it, take it out of context for what it never said. But now when you really, if I were to say, you know what, wait a minute, I get what you're saying here. Like with the Hebrew Israelites, everything, their whole doctrine is really just about identity. That's all it is. We don't know if Jesus was black. We don't know if Moses was black. I always stand on the belief that they were of Middle Eastern descent. And, you know, I do tell people, hey, I believe they had melanin. I'm not going to say how dark they were or how if they were light skinned like me. I can't sit here and say that. But what I can say is, hey, based on this text, based on what this says, this is the truth. But like one doctrine today, you see this going a lot today, polygamy. Polygamy is becoming popular again today. And everybody takes the scripture of David, how he had multiple wives. Solomon had all of these wives. And everybody says, well, if God allowed them to do it, then why isn't it okay today? Why does America say, because now we make it about America, why does America say it's illegal to have multiple wives? Why do you only have to have one wife? But I tell people, one, if you go back to Genesis, God created Adam and Eve. He didn't create Eve. He didn't create Eva. He didn't create Jessica. He didn't create all of these other women. He gave Adam one. If you go to Deuteronomy actually says a king was not ever supposed to have multiple wives. So I believe if the king was not ever supposed to have multiple wives, don't you think that the people beneath the king shouldn't have multiple wives? Then Paul also tells us that's just Old Testament examples. New Testament examples, if I start with Jesus talked about how every man has his wife. It's the husband and the wife. The two come together and make one. He didn't say the three, the four, the five come together and make one. The two come together and make one. Then you have Paul who said every man should have one wife for himself. So I believe the way that to answer your question again, when it comes to eating the meat and then spitting it out, I believe the first thing people have to understand is you don't even know what to spit out if you don't even know what's in there. It's no different than when you teach a toddler, like my son, for instance, the first time he ate a chicken bone, he didn't know that the bone was in the chicken. He didn't even know that that was there. So his mentality is because he sees this meat, oh, let me just bite into it. But it wasn't until he bit into it hard enough to see, wait a minute, what's that crunchy thing? Why did that hurt my teeth? Why did that happen? I think some people, they don't get into the word deep enough. So when somebody else who was slightly in it, not even deeply in it, slightly in it, they not even in, I don't even like to say they in the meaty portion, as Paul would say, slightly in it, they took this little bit of what they read and they just ran away with it. Right. They went crazy with it. That's what happened with the Mormons. That's what happened, honestly, with the Catholic Church. That's what happened with Islam. Yeah. A lot of people don't want to admit that. This is supposed to be a religion of so-called peace, but it's also the number one religion that persecutes Christians. Right. Make it make sense. Yeah. How is it all about peace, but y'all persecuting these other faiths that aren't of your faiths? I don't see Christians over here persecuting Muslims or whatever. Right. So my whole thing is we have to be able to, first of all, know, okay, we eat the meat, we spit out the bone, but you got to even know that there's a bone in there. And you don't know that there's a bone in there unless you've looked at it yourself, unless you've been in the word yourself. So I think it's easy for a lot of people today to be deceived. and to fall into a lot of these false doctrines simply because it comes back to the fact that you are not in the word for yourself. You go to church, and I tell my wife and I talk about this all the time. If your leader, whether he's an apostle, a teacher, an evangelist, a pastor, or a prophet, whoever your leader is, he or she, if they don't touch on certain things in the Bible and you don't read outside of that time that you're under them, you're not going to know it's there.
Right.
Not just that, you don't even know in the context of what they're teaching it from, because they can be teaching it from a love of money perspective.
Yeah.
They can take a scripture that has nothing to do with money and make it about money. They can be taking a scripture that was really about war and say, well, you know, this says this, so I believe this is for me. This is how I'm going to prosper. This is how I'm going to succeed. But because you're not in the word yourself, you don't even know the context of what was really being said.
Right.
And I think a lot of times, a lot of us American Christians are guilty of it, including myself. I'm just now starting to, what's the word they use? I'm just now starting to train myself to not have this American lens when I'm reading the Bible. You got to really have that Middle Eastern lens.
Wow.
That's why I'm big on reading things. I'm big on like history now, like why certain things took place. Why did Jesus say certain things? We have to remember Jesus was not American, and he's not American today.
Yeah.
He was a Jew, you know, who grew up, and he was he born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth. He was all the way over there. He spent a little bit of his time in Egypt, so he understood that culture and everything. But we have to remember that everything he said was related to that culture. So I think for us to truly understand what the text is saying, you have to understand exactly in what context was it being said then, and then how do we apply it to us today. So
no, I agree.